All right. I think the incoming people are starting to slow down, so we'll kick this thing off today. Hello, I'm Jesse Daystar. Uh, Welcome to today's webinar, Cotton Cellulose Biodegradation, a review and to dispel some misconceptions. This webinar is sponsored by Cotton Incorporated and brought to you by Cotton Works. I'm Jesse Daystar, the Chief Sustainability Officer and Vice President of Sustainability here at Cotton Incorporated. And we're excited to have this opportunity to learn more together about cotton biodegradation and the overall issues surrounding microfibers and microplastics. At Cotton Incorporated, we provide a wide range of information and technical assistance and innovation to support companies with their cotton business. This includes apparel, home, textiles to fiber products in health and beauty space. As a not-for-profit organization grounded in science and research, our mission is to help companies succeed in their cotton-related business. Through cottonworks.com, we offer a comprehensive resource for cotton sustainability information, resources, and assistance, all for free. Whether you're looking for detailed technical information on cotton or seeking expert guidance, Cottonworks has got you covered. We encourage everyone to register as a user and take full advantage of these resources. Feel free to submit your questions and comments anytime during the presentation in the Q&A feature. We've allocated time at the end of the presentation to address many of these questions as we can. Additionally, a replay of this webinar will be sent to your email and will be available on cottonworks.com. So that's kind of the housekeeping. So let's jump into the webinar. All right, so to kind of frame this is one of the first pictures of Earth. I think it is actually the first picture of Earth from space. And that was taken around, in the 1970s, I believe. It's very, around this time period here in the 70s. And since then, the plastic in the world, this global plastic production has drastically increased. That picture sort of kicked off a mindset of environmental awareness and really concentrating on what we can do in this world. And since then, the aspect of plastic has just drastically increased through time. It can be a valuable material, but yet it also has its own impacts. And we're starting to see that actually from space. A recent article not too long ago came out indicating that we could actually see piles of clothing in Chile from space. And those piles of clothing look something like this. It's discarded clothing that has been shipped maybe from the United States or some other countries to areas that may or may not have proper or robust waste infrastructure, and ends up in big piles that maybe could be better managed, and we can also see from space. So managing our textile waste is becoming more and more important than ever. And some kind of background information, when we start to talk about plastics, you have big pieces of plastics or macroplastics, which are plastics that are larger than 5 millimeters. So think of the polyester t-shirt on the ground, or maybe the plastic bottle on the ground. That would be a macroplastic on the ground. Or the smaller pieces of plastic, which can be microfibers or just little pieces, and they're generally smaller than 5 millimeters. A study that was released last year, Cotton Incorporated, as well as many other researchers at world-leading institutions, endeavored to put a number behind how much plastic is getting into the environment as plastic leakage from the entire apparel industry. And what plastic leakage is essentially is unmanaged waste. So think of a bottle on the ground or a polyester t-shirt that's just been discarded and exists outside of traditional waste infrastructure, whether it be recycling or perhaps a landfill. So that study was published in Nature Communications and has had many downloads and published in a very good journal. And I encourage you to check that out. It's open access. But we're going to highlight some of the findings here. On total, the apparel industry is responsible for around 14% of all the plastic leakage in the world at a global level. And that's 8.3 million metric tons a year. And that is a big number. It's hard for us to visualize what that is. And that many zeros, that big a number. So we've made it a little bit easier in putting some landmarks in their masses. So it's about 820 times the mass of the Eiffel Tower, 23 times the mass of the Empire State Building, or 9 times the mass of the Golden Gate Bridge. So quite substantial amount of plastic getting into the environment in an unmanaged fashion from the apparel industry every year. And breaking that down a little bit further, we talked about microplastics, the small pieces, and macroplastics, the larger pieces. Well, by mass, the macroplastics dominate the amount of mass getting into the environment as unmanaged waste at 98% of that 8.3 million metric tons, whereas microplastics are only 2%. That being said, the macroplastics and microplastics have different ways of interacting with animals, with our human body, and the environment. And the pure quantity and mass is not necessarily reflective of its impact. They both mattered, the size and the vector and exposure, as well as how much is getting into the environment. So both are important. And as I'll point out a little bit later, macroplastics will likely turn into microplastics through time, through being big pieces and breaking down into small pieces. So the 98% will eventually join the 2%. And where does this come from? Well, on the right-hand side of this bar chart here, we break down the different plastic leakages in terms of different steps for the synthetic apparel value chain. The primary dominator of that impact is going to be from the end of life in the primary and secondary markets, essentially what occurs with a garment when it's done with its life. So sometimes we might ship it to another country that may not have waste infrastructure, and it could be put into an unmanaged landfill, or perhaps it just gets discarded in a way that is outside of traditional waste infrastructure. For the cotton value chain, not much plastic is leaked from the cotton production. Rather, it's the packaging, consumer packaging, and the transportation, and it's drastically smaller than the plastic that gets into the environment from the synthetic value chain. I mentioned earlier that there's different types of big pieces of plastic can become small pieces of plastic, and in that situation, that could be a secondary microfiber where a bigger piece becomes a smaller piece after it's been exposed and released into the environment. So shirt on the ground is tossed as a whole piece and then eventually turns into small pieces, many small pieces. That's a secondary microfiber or microplastic. Whereas when you wash and dry your clothing, in fact, many microfibers, many of them synthetic if you have synthetic clothing, are going to be released directly from the bigger piece. So that would be more of a primary microfiber or microplastic. And that happens every day when we wash and dry our clothes. Some of these fibers are going to be filtered out in the sewage and waste treatment plants, or maybe even at a washing machine. But at some level, many of them will make their way through those systems into fresh water, maybe salt water, and then exist in the environment for some period of time. And we found these microfibers, synthetic microfibers, all over the world. It's pretty much everywhere in the environment, as well as we're finding them more and more in our bodies, and it's quite alarming. When you do some quick Googling, you can find, say on Google Scholar or other databases for peer-reviewed literature, many scientific hits for papers that relate to finding synthetic microfibers or microplastics in air, ocean, water, food, animals, and even in our bodies. And it's, I feel like every other month or every other week, there's a new article finding plastic somewhere I don't want to find plastic. So it's an exploding area of interest, and we're just now at the beginning of understanding how that's actually impacting our health. A fine YouTube channel, the Huberman Lab, actually went into this not long ago, where Dr. Andrew Huberman went into describing what are the impacts to the health, and he outlined a number of areas for which microplastics may actually impact your health. And I encourage folks to check that out. It's a really interesting webinar. But needless to say, it seems like there certainly can be some impacts to health, and we're just now learning what those are And I think most of us would prefer not to have plastic within our bodies. So covering sort of the plastic perspective, now let's talk a little bit more about cotton and biodegradation. So cotton also sheds microfibers, as mentioned earlier, but it actually biodegrades. So we in 2019 discussed this, we performed research and published that. And in 2020, 2021, and 2024, we followed on looking at different conditions, the impacts of dyes and finishes, and comparing it to other cellulose types as well. We also looked at how cotton biodegrades, as well as polyester and maybe the lack thereof biodegradation in various soil conditions, composting, even landfill, and composting in both industrial and more lab type scenarios. So it doesn't, cotton, like cellulose of many types of plants, can biodegrade readily and in a number of different conditions. And one area that I find that's of a lot of interest and maybe even debate today is, does cotton biodegrade when it has finishes applied to it? Well, one of those studies I just previously mentioned actually tested that. We looked at how cotton biodegrades with no finish, with dyes, durable press finish, softener, water repellent, and had a baseline and comparison of microcrystalline cellulose and an oak leaf. Well, it turns out that by and large, all the coated cottons biodegraded quicker than an oak leaf, which is a kind of a good reference. But also some of the finishes actually increased the biodegradation rate, the softener, for example, while some had some effect on maybe lowering it as opposed to a no finish. But at the end of the day, the study cites that the endpoint after these 100 days, there was no significant difference between the different scenarios of coatings and finishes. And that citation to that study is down below should you want to really dig into that, because I think this is an important thing for the audience here and the scientific community to really consider and to fully understand. So I gave you kind of a brief overview of the microfibers, microplastics, and now I'm going to pass it to Dr. Martin Hubbe, where he is going to dive into a recent literature review where he looked at all the existing literature for cellulose biodegradation and performed a really good type of analysis and published that. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Dr. Martin Hubbe, who is a distinguished professor at North Carolina State University.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse, for that introduction. I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Could you reactivate so that I can click forward? So anyway, I am Martin Hubbe, as Jesse said, professor at North Carolina State University with a focus on paper making and paper making chemistry and everything having to do with paper, which of course is made out of cellulosic materials. So I have a wonderful role in all of this because as you have experienced over the last few minutes here, Jesse has given you all the bad news, and he's left me the delightful thing of giving you the good news because he's talked about plastics and all the problems with plastics, and I will have some good news to share. And still, Jesse, you're going to have to advance it for me because I don't yet have the ability to advance. Okay, so here are some of the topics I'll talk about. I'll talk about benchmarking, and you already saw a little bit of that in what Dr. Daystar has presented, talking about the oak leaves, but not only there's oak leaves, but one can use microcrystalline cellulose, the so-called MCC, and you could compare other things to that. And then another great thing is you can compare things to cotton, because cotton is well known. Kind of everybody knows it's biodegradable. The question is how fast it is. And so that's one of the things that we'll be covering in this it's kind of a literature review. I'm mainly the reporter. I'm not talking about my own work. My job is to do the study of the literature and to tabulate things and to break it down to help people to know what it all means together. I'll be talking a little bit about enzymes. Enzymes are all over the place in the environment, and they are mainly what's going to break down all of these cellulosic materials or other materials. And you'll see how different types of cellulose and different environments, soils, lakes, oceans, water treatment plants, are affecting those rates. And still, I need somebody to advance my slide. Okay, just to give a broad overview, I'm using green to represent something that's very much biodegradable, like in a few hours, like starches and sugars. You put them in your mouth and they just dissolve. Whereas decreasing biodegradable, you think about the plastics like polypropylene that's illustrated in the bottom there. It's going to sit around for thousands of years. And in the middle of that, we have various things. As I said, the microcrystalline cellulose. In a lot of academic literature, you're going to see this used as some kind of a benchmark because you can order it from Sigma Aldrich or others, and you can then use that as a criterion because microcrystalline cellulose is widely used in pharmaceuticals, so there's a lot of it, and it can be used as a benchmark. Small biomass pieces such as dead leaves, as Jesse said. But in between there, we have some different types of things. With the cellulose fibers, one of the themes I'll be talking about is, does a cellulose fiber have lignin in it or not? And lignin is the binder, the phenolic binder. It's a little bit like an epoxy resin that would be in a tree. Now, cotton doesn't have it. And that makes cotton inherently much more biodegradable than, say, a chip of oak wood or something like that. Then the question is how big it is. If you have a great big block of something, it's going to take longer to rot. But even a tree was going to rot in several years in the forest, in the soil. Now there's some bioplastics, and everyone's excited about them. Polyhydroxybutyrate is an example, which is quite biodegradable. And then the polylactic acid, which is much less biodegradable. It really is hard to degrade. Okay, Jesse, give me the next one. Okay, so here's this was just representing a bunch of different environments. I'm talking about the soil environment on the left, or landfilling, or composting, and these would be kind of quantified as dry environments relative to some other things of interest. We've got freshwater and seawater. And also in the upper right, there is the reference. This is in the journal Bioresources, and it is a teamwork effort with Jesse and Dr. Venditti, who is on my faculty, Dr. Pollack, and other people who have been students in our program, Dr. Barlas, Marie Ankeny, and Steve Pires from Cotton Incorporated, all in this group. And together we put together this article talking about what has been done. On the lower right, we have the wastewater treatment options. Aeration is the common wastewater treatment you're going to see at various municipal facilities, county facilities, but there is aerobic digestion, which is maybe a minority, but it's quite exciting. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as Jesse said, that a lot of the textiles would be coming from washing, but one of the things to realize is that if one's looking at the discharge of cellulosic material, this little icon at the left, the toilet, this is really where a lot of the bulk is coming from, because this is done kind of on purpose. There's a lot of fiber that's going in there, and in textile terminology, these would be called microfibers, even though they're regular sized fibers from pine trees and eucalyptus trees and things like that. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about enzymes and why we need enzymes. What we see, those black lines there in the middle of the slide, are representing cellulose chains. And the thing to know about cellulose is it's quite highly crystalline. It will be 80% plus crystalline in a lot of the cellulosic materials that you have. So it's not all crystalline, as represented by those sort of blue blocks, is talking about the crystalline zones, crystalline regions. And in the middle, where it says, the endoglucanases are working, well, these endoglucanases that I show as little Pac-Man figures, they're enzymes, and they're going to be working on the non-crystalline. Some people call it amorphous regions. Some people call it the disturbed crystalline regions. And it's going to be working and cutting up those amorphous chains. Then you're going to be seeing these end groups that will either be solid black or light blue filled end groups. And those end groups are representing the cellulobiohydrolase, which is another kind of enzyme that works on the crystalline regions, and they start from the end groups and work along the surface of those crystalline regions and working in the other way. One will go to the right and one will go to the left in this diagram. And then, not to leave everything out, we'll have the cellobiose in the upper right, which cleaves the cellobiose and the cellotriose to make it into the monomeric sugar. And it's important because if you don't do that, it will build up and it causes an inhibition of the rest of the operation. Now, as complicated as all that seems or may seem, it's actually less complicated than some of the other enzymes. Like for the hemicellulose, you need a lot more different enzymes to get that job done. So let's go to the next slide. Well, here's just a table that's summarizing those previous three slides. And no, it's just, no, this one is, kind of, giving a summary of all the different kinds of things that you might want to break down: starch, chitin, proteins, cellulose, hemicellulose, lignin, lipids, natural rubber. I've got some citations there, but the associated enzymes, you see that long list there? In order to break down the chitin, the chitosan that's coming from the crustaceans, you need a whole bunch of enzymes to do that. Cellulose, as you see, it's those three that I listed. Hemicelluloses, it's a bunch of them, in addition to the ones that I'm showing there, because there are various different kinds of hemicelluloses. Lignin is tougher because lignin is hydrophobic. It's rather dense. It's highly cross-linked. It's got a lot of aromatic groups. It's hard to break down, but there are some lactases and peroxidases coming from brown rot, soft rot, and white rot fungus that will break down the lignin. So we go to the next slide here. Okay, so let me start talking about some results. Again, this is the work of Smith. I'm going to show three graphs from the work of Smith et al. Work done at NC State and other places chipping in here. But anyway, in that work, you can see that they were measuring the biodegradability as a function of time, and the time frame is something reasonable. 100 days, less than a third of a year, it's going to substantially break down. And we're comparing some different things. Like the green one at the bottom is kind of suspicious. Why didn't it break down? Well, it's non-woven wipes, of which a substantial part of it is polypropylene. And the polypropylene does not break down. Whereas the other ones, let's look at, first of all, at that light orange one in the middle, the microcrystalline cellulose. It degrades, but then it comes up to 60%. And so it's a pretty fast degradation, but it doesn't go to 100%. If we look at cotton microfibers, that's the purple ones on top. And so this one degraded as fast as the MCC, so it's meeting the benchmark there, and it is going to a higher level. And then even within the 100 days, it's getting up in the mid 80%. So it's on its way to essentially full biodegradation. Yeah, and so we look at the flushable wipes, we can look at tissue paper, and we can see that there's a family of curves, and we have a clear differentiation between the cellulosic fibers and the sort of the plastic containing material that did not degrade very much except for its cellulosic content. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have similar work in the same study, but this time they're using lake water. And in this lake water study, they're showing that, again, it's the same materials they're comparing. And so we see the microcrystalline cellulose giving these intermediate results. It's a different environment, so now we'll have a different concentrations of enzymes. Some of the details will be different. Some of the shapes of the curves are a little bit different, but again, we see that the cotton fibers are heading up towards 100% in that environment, and the non-woven wipes, primarily polypropylene, they didn't degrade, and you see even that was looked like negative. Something's happening there. There might be some occlusion of other stuff adsorbing onto that material that's giving you some other result. Next slide, please. And then we go to seawater, and this is a big concern because a lot of the aerial images and things, a lot of the stories in the news are about the buildup of microfibers. What about the cellulosic microfibers? And we can see that even in the ocean, we have the same story. The microcrystalline cellulose benchmark, the tissue paper, the cotton microfibers are all kind of in a family and well differentiated from the non-woven cellulose containing wipes. Let's go to the next slide. And this is where it's summarizing those three graphs. And some of the keys here is you're looking at those same 5 things that we're comparing, is that the biodegradation rates that we're seeing in that amount of time are 75% and higher, except for the polypropylene based wipes that maybe there's some degradable content, but most of it wasn't degrading. So wastewater treatment, we've got seawater in the middle, similar results, and lake water. So it's basically confirming the same thing again and again. Let's go to the next slide now. Okay, so here's another one, and here they're looking at different kinds of cellulosic fibers. So now we're going to compare the cotton versus some paper-making fibers of different kinds. For instance, hardwood bleached, that could be in a tissue paper. That could be eucalyptus, very popular in tissue papers. SBSK is solid bleached softwood kraft. So that could be a component of a tissue paper as well. And then linerboard, the thing about linerboard, this is the brown boxes, so it has still a lot of the lignin, maybe half of the original lignin, which is this phenolic, natural cross-linked resin that is quite hard to break down, but there are enzymes that will do it gradually. So you'll see that the linerboard, there was some delay for it to get started, but then eventually it's even in this time period of 25 days, it's showing, better than 60% degradation. If we look at, I might have mixed that up with mechanical pulp. But anyway, they look sort of a similar color there. But the mechanical pulp also has a lot of lignin. Mechanical pulp is like in a newspaper, where essentially what they do is they grind up the fibers. It's a little more sophisticated than grinding, but they make them into cellulosic individual fibers that you can make into a sheet of paper that may turn yellow over time. It has a lot of lignin, so it gives a slower biodegradation. And then at the bottom we have newsprint, and that is made from these high lignified fibers. And of course, the microcrystalline cellulose is the darker curve there that shows a pretty fast biodegradation. On the right, I have a figure, and it shows the methodology that they're using for here. What they're doing is they are quantifying the amount of carbon dioxide that is produced by the metabolism by those enzymes. And this is a very clever thing, because by sticking a pH meter into this thing, you can continually monitor what is the state of biodegradation, because you stick the pH meter into that KOH, you're measuring the consumption of the base, because the CO2, when it goes into the atmosphere, it's a carbonic acid, and it will neutralize some of the base, and you can quantify it. That's how you get this marvelous data here that you can get multiple times a day, essentially continuous. Next slide, please. Okay, and then this is kind of summarizing some different studies, because this work is being done all over the world, and hopefully by looking at a lot of different data, then you can have a very strong conclusion, because if one of them did it wrong, then others will have done it right. And you can see that the percent degradation that people have found again and again is dependent on the time and the details of how they did the different studies, but they're able to achieve pretty high levels of biodegradation. Let's go to the next slide. So let's consider, what about factors? What do we learn from all of these studies? Well, I put them into two categories here. This isn't meant to be exhaustive, but it's kind of the beginning of a brainstorming list that for slower biodegradation, we could substitute it with various substituent works. Everyone knows that you could take cellulose and you convert it to cellulose acetate. Turns out if you do so, it makes it a lot less biodegradable. It can slowly biodegrade, but it's really quite a remarkable change. A little closer to home, talking about things that we've already talked about, lignin content, such as that newsprint, which was really slow to biodegrade. That was because the cellulose is essentially encased in a layer of this slow to degrade lignin. Now, lignin will degrade in the forest. It becomes part of the humic acid, but it takes longer. Crystallinity, as we saw, the package of enzymes is all set up to take care of crystallinity. It takes a while. If it were all amorphous cellulose, it would go faster, but the crystallinity is not something that's going to be a formidable barrier. It's kind of natural. That's the way cellulose is, and it's part of nature. And then certain dyes and finishes can affect things, as Jesse showed in some examples. I'll show some more examples now. That these dyes and finishes can have an effect. It's generally not a major effect. It might delay the start of biodegradation in a few cases, but it's not something major. Now, on the right side of this slide, just to start things off, there might be some questions about this, but moisture is essential for these biological processes. So if we store something really, really dry, it's not going to biodegrade. And increasing the temperature, warm temperatures where life will go on, are ideal for rapid biodegradation. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I just wanted to show this because I want people to understand why wood takes longer to biodegrade. If we think about the left, this diagram is kind of showing a little bit of a simplified structure of wood in which we're looking at a tiny, tiny little sliver of wood in which we're looking at the microfibers, and each cellulosic microfiber, which has the little hatch lines in it to show the direction of the cellulose chains, are separated from the lignin, which is I'm showing as brown, and the pink layer is the hemicellulose. So this is kind of a simplified structural diagram based on a lot of work that's been done over the years by wood scientists, that this is how it's laid out in a little tiny sliver of wood. We're not even talking about a whole fiber, just a tiny little sliver of fiber with the microfibrils and the domains of lignin and the domains of hemicellulose, which is a lot of it kind of acting as an intermediary, and there's even some covalent bonding between the lignin and the hemicellulose. Now, when you convert that into something like tissue paper, you're dissolving away all of that lignin. And so you're left with this kind of porous thing on the right that's about to come apart because you've removed the lignin. And that's got to be a lot less formidable barrier to biodegradation. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's think about this issue, a rather practical thing, because if you have a cotton garment and you treat it with some kind of finish or some kind of dye or a durable press. I noticed in one of Dr. Daystar's slides, the durable press one was the one that took the longest to degrade. Softeners, water repellents, and then oak leaves is kind of as something on the right. And he's comparing here work done by Zambrano at day 1 on the top, day 13, and day 102 on the bottom. And you can see the progress of degradation happening in all of those cases. And you can see that all of them essentially are degrading gradually over time. Next slide. Okay, so then the composting with the indigo dyes. Here we have on the top a control, I believe, but then we have various different kinds of indigo dyes, and you can see that if you look at the progress of the days going up to day 77, you can see that all of them on this slide are degrading. And in terms of quantification, it's hard to differentiate that one's substantially faster than the other. So even though there are some differences that you can determine from careful experimentation, they're all basically, just if you have a little bit of patience, they're going to degrade. Next slide. Okay, so one of the questions you have is, what can we do with the waste material? If you have a waste, you can put it into a modern landfill, and this is maybe even the responsible way to take care of waste. You put it into a landfill. In the landfill, they have technology in order to take care of the evolution of methane. They collect the methane and prevent leaching. They have sealants on the bottom to keep the water from going into the groundwater. And so you can feel pretty good about a modern landfill in terms of trying to, avoid harm of throwing things out. However, sort of on the left side of this, we say, okay, if we have stuff that's going to a wastewater treatment plant where it gets aerated, it goes through a clarifier, and it's producing sludge. And the common practice is to take that sludge and to put it into this landfill. The methane comes out. The collection is pretty efficient, but maybe not everywhere. Maybe in some country or in some situation, a lot of that methane is going to the atmosphere. This is a very serious greenhouse gas, much more serious than carbon dioxide. So this is a big issue. Well, what else can we do? Well, one thing that can be done, in fact, there's a lot of progress that's been done recently. There's a lot of literature on this. There's a lot of people who are doing this on an industrial scale, is composting. Composting converts this material into something you can use as a soil amendment, which is valuable. And it also minimizes the amount of CO2 that is released to the atmosphere. Or instead, you can use anaerobic digestion, of which a product is methane. And so this is not bad methane. This is good methane because you've got it captured and you can use it as a fuel. You can burn it for heat. You can use it for organic synthesis, whatever you want. Next slide, please. And that is my last slide because I've given you enough information, and now we can go to question and answer. If you got any questions for me after this, you can always go to my email, hubbe@ncsu.edu, or you can go to my papermaking website, or you can go to the bioresources website as shown here. So thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hubbe, for your great explaining of how this all works. So for more information, you can also go to Cotton Today, where we have a vast amount of resources, peer-reviewed literature, and various blogs and even fact sheets where you can learn more about cotton sustainability. And more recently, we just started a landing page that is all about cotton and its ability to help replace plastic-based fibers. So check that out. It's cottontoday.com. And then also, you can check out Cottonworks, as we mentioned earlier, which hosted this here webinar. And we thank you for your attention and hope you do check out that website for more information. So we've had a number of really good questions come in through the chat. And if you haven't already done so, please do add some more questions. I'll be either asking and answering them myself, and or passing it to Dr. Hubbe, depending upon the question. So we'll kind of start going through those now. One of the first and easiest ones is, will this webinar recording be shared? And the answer is definitely yes. So we covered that early, but it will be shared on the Cottonworks website, along with many of the other webinars that we actually have on there as well. I'm going to pass this one to Dr. Hubbe. Can you provide a definition for what biodegradable is? Does it mean that the molecules break down, size, or structure? or what? Can you kind of dive into that and let the audience know what exactly is that biodegradation or biodegradable?
Yeah, let's think in terms of something practical. Uh, as Dr. Daystar says, it would be the ideal is that it can go back to monomers, or at least it's going to go back to chemical structures that would already be in the environment. So if it can break down, some people call it mineralization, is a term I've heard. Where you're saying, okay, you have whatever plastic or cellulose, whatever, and it's going to break down to its chemical components. So that would be sort of a purist definition. I'm sure there's some practical ones we can think of, because if you can't see it there anymore, yeah, it's hard to say that it's still there. Yeah, so I don't have a full answer for that. But I do, really think that that the way that some of the research that I talked about did it is really neat, where they look at the carbon dioxide generation. Now that's a little bit tricky. As I've been thinking about it, one of the things that bothers me is why do not so many of these things go to 100%? I think there's some issues there about calibration. Maybe it's a matter of, well, some of these things it's not quite going by you know, the mechanism that you're proposing, but it's still essentially going 100%, but you need to kind of recalibrate it. So that's another issue for further research.
Great, thank you so much. I think you might have touched on this, but could you give us a little bit more of a definition of what MCC or microcrystalline cellulose actually is?
Yeah, so what you do to make microcrystalline cellulose is the most of this is coming from wood cellulose. And so you've put it through a pulping process to remove the lignin and a lot of the hemicellulose. And then what they do is they take sulfuric acid. It's essentially this 72% sulfuric acid that you get commonly in the big jug. And you take that material and you heat it up under prescribed conditions that are sufficient. And what it does is it basically hydrolyzes all of the non-crystalline material, or at least a lot of the non-crystalline material. There's a lot of MCC products out there, and there will be at different levels of this. If you go even further, you end up with cellulose nanocrystals. But if you go to an intermediate level, you get microcrystalline cellulose. Then you have to rinse it, and this is widely used in pharmaceuticals. So think about a pill that you might take, a white pill. Very, very common to constitute the pills with microcrystalline cellulose.
Excellent. I guess while we're kind of on the topic to some extent, could you give us a little bit more information of what is the composition or what is cotton exactly made out of? Cotton fiber, that is.
Yeah, most of the composition of cotton will be cellulose. There will be a little bit of wax, but mostly it's pretty simple. Now, one thing to remember about all of these fibers, not only the cotton but also the fibers from wood, is they are a layered structure. So you will have typically in these structuresi a lot of the cellulose that's actually oriented in the direction of the fiber, and that makes them quite dimensionally stable in the lengthwise dimension, but then they will swell a lot in the thickness dimension. And then the individual fibers have layers that wrap this main layer, and then there's a layer in the middle that's basically also curling around and around in a tighter helix to keep the thing from collapsing. Uh, Cotton fibers tend to be rather dense and filled, whereas the ones from the trees can have a rather large lumen space in the middle of them. The other thing is, we're thinking about the fibers from the trees, basically 1 to 3 or even 4 millimeters in length, and the cotton can be longer.
Excellent. Another good question that came in, it would be how realistic are the biodegradation test methods compared to maybe actual conditions? And I know that we looked at many different conditions. Could you maybe think on that a little bit?
Yeah, as I said, I really like the idea of using the carbon dioxide generation because then you have something you can continually measure, but then you have to kind of make some assumptions about what exactly is happening in the degradation. And maybe that idealized mechanism isn't quite what's happening in your case, and that would give some doubt about the numbers. But then, one can always, kind of, like put it into the ground and kind of look at it. So you look at a lot of the studies in the past, they'll use biodegradation in soil, basically put it in the soil. And what you're doing is you're trusting the fact that a typical soil will have a lot of fungi and bacteria that are just there. And when some food, meaning your cellulose material, goes in there, they proliferate, and within a fairly short period of time, they produce the enzymes. They produce a lot of different enzymes, and they're able to break it down effectively. And so, you dig it up after a certain amount of time, and you look and say, "Oh, it's all gone." Well, it's not as quantified in many cases because you can't even take something out to weigh it at that point.
Yeah, that actually you've kind of answered what I was going to ask as my next question. But the next question I had on the list was those enzymes. Do those exist in the environment readily? And you seem like they can, but maybe not always. Can you expand upon that a little bit? I mean, I think they do.
Yeah, yeah. There is a question. Let's say you're in the middle of the ocean and you have a lignified fiber, and you say, well, is there any reason that there's going to be that lactase or peroxidase enzyme to break down the lignin in the middle of the ocean, or say in your stomach? Why is it going to be there? And that doesn't have a reason to be there. So there could be some questions about the concentrations in some kind of a weird, inappropriate environment for breaking down something that's not usually there. But these things have a way of being able to multiply very, very quickly because they're just single-celled, organisms, or very common small organisms in terms of some of the fungi, and that they can proliferate and produce the enzymes quickly.
Yeah, and I also just point out too that cellulose is an incredibly abundant material throughout the world, and plants in the ocean are made out of cellulose, and just generally plants are. So it's the biota and the enzymes are probably tracking along with those cellulose materials to some extent. Um, Another one that kind of came in was maybe, and I'll take a first stab at this, is asking what's the difference between biodegradation or kind of more that versus composting. And I would say for that definition, I mean, there are strict definitions that you can look up that are defined by standards, but how I would verbalize it would be composting is a type of biodegradation. Biodegradation is a broader sense of breaking down, in this case, a plant material into CO2 commonly and other materials, where potentially in a natural environment or in a landfill or perhaps in a composting situation. In composting, it's an engineered environment that is designed to biodegrade materials. Usually you're going to mix the right ratios of nutrients, cellulose, moisture, and other components. You're going to aerate that or turn it and a means to optimize biodegradation to create a product that can be used for field application and apply nutrients and have those benefits. So they're very similar, but one's more of a engineered type and more specific than just biodegradations.
I would just add one thing to
Yeah.
that is that if you're going to do, very effective composting, it's going to heat itself up. And the reason it heats up is the metabolism of, what's happening biologically. And that metabolism, creates heat and it heats it up. And it can actually, in some cases, overheat if it's not well managed. So this is the importance of, aerating, having controlled aeration rate in an industrial composting plant in order to, tune in the right temperature so that you have the best rate of biodegradation. And so this heating up is quite important. But the thing to remember is that if something is thrown into the environment, is not going to just magically end up in a composting situation. That's if everything done right and it's collected right. And so it's not a solution to all of our environmental problems, just if it's compostable. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. And one thing I'll also just point out too, we're talking about in biodegradation that cotton would release CO2. Remember that cotton pulled in CO2 through photosynthesis, and we're actually wearing what was once CO2 floating around in the air, warming the earth. Now it's warming our bodies. And at some point, that CO2 will be likely released back to the atmosphere. And on net, it'll be, the CO2 in, CO2 out. It's kind of a wash unless we keep that CO2 locked up through other means, such as durable products made from cellulose. But that's another webinar, actually, perhaps the next one. Another great question that kind of came in now that we're on the composting genre was, what happens to the dyes and finishes, and does that potentially have some considerations that we need to think about? Well, I can give a little bit of background on this. So we have several studies, and their citations are linked. So when the recording is released, you can go back and check those out, or they're both on Cotton Today and Cotton Works. But we looked at denim and a few other materials where we composted them, and we looked at a variety of off-the-shelf bought, just retail denim that was mostly cotton, like 98, 99%, and then one that was about 20% that was polyester, and we composted it, working with Cornell. And we also sent those same materials out to a private lab to run their composting standardized test on it. Both conditions, or both researching organizations, determined that the cotton heavy, or the majority cotton jeans composted and met the standard even that composting standards have. And one of the other components besides just like, does it biodegrade, was what happens with plant toxicity. It passed that. It looked at like fluorocarbons and heavy metals, and the cotton jeans passed those standards as well. The polyester 20%, 80% cotton jean did not pass that standard for the composting. And we saw with Cornell very visually that the polyester is left behind with the cotton proportion being biodegraded. Some other research we looked at too, and more biodegradation in soil, found that it seems like some chemistries do biodegrade, or do, are undetectable potentially after some time. That being said, I think there is certainly some considerations here, particularly as PFAS and other more persistent chemistries do exist. Luckily, those are not often applied to cotton materials, but it's something to consider. And I think that, we need to consider that both polyester and cotton have chemistry on them. And if we're worried about chemistry in our textiles, we need to design a chemistry that, has a good environmental profile, that does have a lower impact if it does get into the environment, whether it be for washing and drying or through the microfibers. So these chemistry challenges need to be solved with chemistry solutions, so that the fibers can do what they need to potentially biodegrade in the environment. But that's something that we are looking into, and we'll probably have more research over the next few years also.
Yeah, if I could just add a comment, I want to keep sort of promoting the role of the enzymes here. One thing that you'll look at is in the scientific literature is people talking about the role of the lignin type enzymes, the lactases and the peroxidases, especially in breaking down various dyestuffs. So you have a dye chemical that involves aromatic groups, and some of these peroxidases have flexibility that they can attack a range of different chemicals, not just the lignin. And so they're actually quite effective. Of course, as Dr. Daystar says, it's not going to be every chemical, but a lot of the dyes are quite susceptible to breakdown by these same enzymes, or various enzymes from the environment.
Excellent. All right, we have maybe just enough time for one or two more questions. Let's see here. What are your thoughts about, Dr. Hubbe, what are your thoughts about these synthetic type fibers that claim biodegradability? I know you mentioned a few other cellulose-like materials. What are your thoughts on those? And do you think there's promise in a biodegradable synthetic fiber?
Yeah, so let's think in terms of like something like cellulose acetate butyrate. This is a common fiber, material. You could use it for, making a toothbrush handle or something like that. And it's useful. And you say, oh, it came from cellulose. It must be pretty biodegradable. There's a couple problems with that. One thing is that after you put this acetate and butyrate groups on it, there's an ester bond, and so you'd say, well, theoretically, you should have a lipase or some kind of esterase to be able to break it. Well, the problem is the material is too dense and too hydrophobic, and those same enzymes that should be able to do it just can't do it. It's just the nature of the material. It's too hydrophobic and it's too dense. And one sees this again and again and again. Polylactic acid, again, theoretically, you'd say it's an ester, it should ought to break down. But then when you actually do the studies, you find that it doesn't. And again, it's hydrophobic and it's dense. Whereas you take something like, say, nylon, okay, that's an amide bond, and it's to some extent biodegradable. It takes a while, but it's not like that. This synthetic stuff, the nylon, is going to be much more difficult to biodegrade than the cellulose acetate butyrate. No, they're both hydrophobic and kind of dense, and they're both kind of intermediate. They're possible to break down, but they take a long time.
Yeah, there's definitely a number of researchers working on this, and I think that I think we'll need to see data. We always like to see data, and I'll remind you that we've cited very thoroughly this webinar with citations of peer-reviewed literature, very good journals, as well as on Cottonworks and Cotton Today. The information there is heavily cited and has external review to make sure that we're sticking to the science. And I think that's we have to have good data to make these good decisions. But overall, I think this has been really interesting for me. I always enjoy hearing Dr. Hubbe teach and really get into the weeds around chemistry. And I hope that you did too. We'll certainly be doing more webinars, and there's a lot more really important information around this topic. I know it's nuanced. It involves a wide variety of types of sciences and chemistry, but I think it's worthwhile to invest our interest and our time in learning and figuring out how cotton can be a solution to the plastic issue and how we can design more sustainable clothing with cotton and just do better in the apparel industry overall. So overall, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, this will be recorded and shared. I encourage you to check out more information on cottonworks.com as well as Cotton Today. Thank you very much, Dr. Hubbe, and I hope everyone has a good day.